So let us begin. We're talking about the concept of meditation. Up until now, the whole focus of meditation has been on techniques, on the technicalities of meditation in a sense. Especially when it comes to meditating on holy names and putting the names together and on verses and so on and so forth. And the power of holy names should not be underestimated. They do have tremendous power. However, there are those who argue that mechanical meditation doesn't get to the core of the issue. Yes, it can bring a person to a certain transcendent state. It can also bring a person certain powers of insight. Let us call it even Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, divine insight. However, these, I wouldn't call them critics, but these proponents of other methods say it still doesn't get one to the core issue. What is the core issue? The core issue is not techniques to force, so to speak, to force God or God's messengers, however you want to put it, to open the doors and reveal a few secrets. That is not what we're after. What we're after essentially is to become in a sense, a Beis Hamikdash, a temple in which the divine presence can be revealed. Let them build for me a temple or a tabernacle, and I will dwell among them. Actually, among them is an interesting turn of phrase, because it doesn't say I will dwell in it, in the building that you build me, in the tabernacle or the temple or the Beis Hamikdash. I will dwell amongst them, I will dwell within them, literally. Meaning to say, Kabbalah takes this literally, I will dwell within each and every person. If they make for me, in and of themselves, they make for me a dwelling place. In other words, so to speak, hollow out a space for me and build that space into divine space in which godliness can reside. So the question is, how do we do that? So again, one of the techniques is using holy names. Another technique is using verses. But these are in a sense techniques. They're building the building, but they're not serving the service. This is what brings us to Hasidic meditation. Hasidic meditation is essentially concepts. It's not words, it's ideas. Using words is very powerful. We know that words are powerful. You can even get your phone to operate by talking to Siri or talking to Siri, talking to Siri or talking to Hey Google or Okay Google, whatever it is, and they'll do your bidding. Like the genie coming out of the bottle kind of thing. You can get all kinds of answers. So words are powerful. Words communicate. Words make a certain reality. The question is, what's beyond the words? What do the words indicate? Now, the holy names, although they may have a meaning and they may have something that they do indicate, they point towards, as I mentioned before, all of the holy names, each one represents a certain sphera or perhaps a cluster of sphirot. They're traditionally, there's a different name for each one of the sphirot. So really there are 10 holy names, even though 7 of them are the most well-known, although those are the ones that we're not allowed to erase. But ultimately, there are 10 holy names. And these names correspond to the Sfirot. So therefore, when you're saying a certain name, when a certain name comes up, it is indicative of a certain flow from that particular Sfirah. Or, as we mentioned before, when the names are combinations of various gematrias and they're spelled out, it's an attempt to connect the vessel to the light. Connect the vessel to the light. In other words, make that interface between the two things, the vessel being us down here and the light being the divine flow, which comes down through the Sfirot. That's all fine and dandy. And it's all true. And it's all important. However, it is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not to have some flowing towards us from a one Sfira or another, or from one world or another. The idea ultimately is dveikut, cleaving to God. Or, if we want to put it this way, making a space, a divine space in which God dwells. How do we go about that? So, Hasidic meditation has a whole different approach. It's not the names that are important, it's the concepts that are important. The ability to speak is only a communication of a concept. Between the concept and the speech, between the concept and the communication, come the words of speech. And in order to be able to get things into words, there is what is called a tzimtzum, there's a constriction. From thought into speech is a constriction. We give the example of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, a famous story that Chaim Vital, his main student, told. And one Sabbath afternoon, he was sleeping. The Arizal was sleeping he would have a custom to sleep for an hour on Sabbath afternoon. And so Rabbi Chaim Vital walked into the room for some reason. Maybe he needed a book or something like that, whatever. He walked into the room and he saw that the Arizal's eyes were moving and his lips were moving. So afterwards, when the Arizal woke up, he said to him, "My master, what were you dreaming about? What were you saying? What were you dreaming about?" So he said, "What I dreamt in that hour was Pashas Balak, and the deep explanations of that particular section of the Torah called Balak would take me 80 years to explain." Why 80 years to explain? Because everything that you see in one picture, in a moment, which encapsulates everything thereof, the entire picture, can only come out in a linear fashion in words. You can't give the person all the words at once and let him sort the jumble out for himself. No, the words have to come in a linear kind of a way, right? One word after another to make the person understand. And what the student understands, or the other person you're communicating with understands, is not the way you understand it. He doesn't experience the experience that you had. Yes, he can understand a concept, but he won't experience the experience as you had it. So therefore, Hasidism tries to get beyond the communication with words. And in fact, even get beyond the idea of images. There are conceptual, there are ideas, concepts, which when one meditates on these concepts, and not just on the technical meaning of the concept, but rather on the implications of the concept and what that means to me in my life and so on, then one comes to a much deeper sense of self-nullification, or oneself merging into godliness, sort of disappearing and merging into godliness, so to speak. So what is this concept that I'm talking about? So there's a statement of the one of the great Hasidic rabbis, that said that Kabbalistic thought or Hasidic thought is one idea with two versions. The one idea with two versions is said in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, actually. The Baal Shem Tov was the one that said this. He said the two versions is that God is everything and everything is God. Again, it's one idea with two versions. God is everything. Everything is God. These are two very different meditations, as I will explain. But those are the basic meditations of Hasidic thought. Now, to be able to grasp, first of all, what that means, that God is everything. And alternatively, everything is God. To be able to grasp that and understand that, so this needs quite a strong, focus on what what's really behind all that. Like how does that work? How can we say that everything is God? Now, obviously, we have to first of all rule out certain misunderstandings of what that means. When we say God is everything or everything is God, we are definitely ruling out pantheism. In other words, that the extent of what God is nature. God is nature, nature is God. That we're ruling out, that's pantheism. Or God within nature is all that there is. We're definitely ruling that out. All we are saying is that there is nothing besides God. There's nothing besides God. Now, what does that mean? So, there are dissertations which actually discuss this whole idea, and it's called in Hasidic terminology that everything is God. God is everything is called Yichuda Ilo'o. Yichuda Ilo'o, the higher Yichud, where all that's left, so to speak, is God. God is everything. And then there's what's called Yichuda Tata, the lower unity, where the focus is on everything is God. So, what's the difference in the two types of meditation? The first type of meditation focuses on essentially only the presence of God. That really there is nothing else. There's nothing else. All there is God. And therefore, the meditation and the feeling and the attempt is to merge into that and realize that there is nothing else. That you, as an independent, separate existence, don't essentially exist. It doesn't matter if you use the words. You can use the word. Dennis asks, should one silently repeat these words in one's mind, or just rest in the thought with no repeated words? You don't have to repeat the words. You can repeat it. It doesn't really make any difference. The idea is to not simply say the words. However, the idea is to realize what the reality of that means. Like, what does that all mean? How could it be that there is a world out here, apparently, and according to Jewish thought, according to Kabbalah as well, we're not denying the existence of the world. It's not like in certain Buddhist and perhaps Hindu religions, where they say there is no world, it's all an illusion. The world is not an illusion, the world exists. How do we know the world exists? Because it says on the Torah, the first line of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz, God created the heavens and earth and everything in it. Can't deny that. So therefore, it certainly exists. However, what is the existence of the world? The way it was asked by classical philosophers, Jewish philosophers, and other philosophers as well, but certainly in the Jewish tradition, they ask, can a thing create itself? The answer is, of course not. Therefore, the conclusion is, it must have been created by something outside of itself. Then you can't not come to that conclusion. 1 second, sorry. You can't not come to that conclusion. That has to be your conclusion. But if it was created by something else, was that other thing not also created? And we have to understand like what that means for something to be a creator but not to be created. In order for something not to be created, it has to transcend time. It has to be a different or an altogether different order of being. Now, the meditation therefore would follow, to a certain extent, the same path that some of the other Kabbalistic meditations follow, a meditation on the Seder Hishtalshalut. The Seder Hishtalshalut means the chaining down of the worlds from ultimate being to physical being. From true being, the true being of God, to the physical world. And how it goes down, right down through the chain, through the series of cause and effects, etc. And what starts off the series of cause and effects is what's called the Tzimtzum Harishon, the first Tzimtzum. So, and how does what is before the first Tzimtzum connect to what is after the Tzimtzum? And so on and so forth. It's a whole long discussion, which perhaps we'll get into in a subsequent class, how exactly it works. But the end result of that is a realization as one goes through the whole process of following how this world came into being. One can lose not only a sense of time, but a sense of self altogether. Particularly when coming down, eventually, all right through one goes through this entire process, comes down to what is now a physical world, and realizing that this physical world is nothing other than a divine act. In other words, the word for world, as I've said many times, is concealment. Olam, he'elem, concealment. The word olam, world, comes to the Hebrew word he'elem, concealment. God conceals himself. But ultimately, in concealing himself, he kind of reveals himself. What's the revelation there? The revelation is that the world ultimately is not a thing. The world is an action. And just as an action is, when you stop doing the action, the thing would cease to exist, whatever it is. Let's just say, for example, if I'm walking, right, I'm doing an action. So you could look at me at that moment and say, he's a walker, or he's a person who's doing a person who is walking, right? He's a walker or a runner. As soon as I stop running or I stop walking, I'm no longer can be called a runner at that point in time. Historically, maybe, yeah. I mean, in the future, maybe, yeah. But at that point in time, I'm standing still. I can't be called a runner. The action has stopped. Similarly, the whole process of creation is continuous. It's not something that happened once upon a time. It started once upon a time. But it is an ongoing thing. Yes, Phoenix, it is. That's the name Elohim. So the whole process of creation, therefore, is an activity. And if that activity would stop in for a moment, the existence would cease to be. But more than that, not only is the process of creation an ongoing thing, the process of creation must begin from outside of itself, from something that transcends, from a level that transcends creation. In other words, the yesh, existence, and whatever we are talking about, whatever level, whatever world we're talking about as existence. Existence must come out of non-existence. Yesh must come out of ayin, out of nothingness. Then the something comes out of nothing. Why is it called nothing? It's not called nothing because it isn't there. It's called nothing because it's not understood. It can't be described. That nothingness can be described in words or in pictures of any sort whatsoever. It's transcendent from transcendent being. In any event, that meditation is the one version, the version of God is everything. And of course, what I've given you now is just like, sort of just a very, very brief summary in a thimble, in a nutshell. Then there's the other way around. The other way around is everything is God. Now, here is where the possibility of error comes into play primarily. When we say everything is God, it doesn't mean that the trees and the fields and the rocks are God. It just means that the conclusion is that there is no existence to anything unless it has this divine energy within it. In other words, the path to understanding everything is God starts with looking at the world around us and stripping away, so to speak, the outer surface of things in order to get to the inner core of what it is. So that meditation is a movement, in a sense, from below to above. The main meditation starts with the world, but gradually moves upwards and upwards and upwards. It is, in many ways, the more favored aspect, the more favored approach to meditation. Each of these versions has advantages and disadvantages. And the advantages of the second one, of the second type of meditation, perhaps outweigh to a certain extent the advantages of the first type. The advantages of the first type, the advantage is that it's absolute truth. And it begins with absolute truth and then sort of comes down to us. In other words, it's something that we're imbued with from above. The disadvantage of it is that to a certain extent, it doesn't really appeal to, it doesn't encompass our daily life in the world to the same extent. Yes, it encompasses it. This is actually something I have to speak about at much greater length because otherwise it's going to be misunderstood. All right, so you know what? Let's discuss that in the next time, the advantages and disadvantages of each of the approaches, and we'll leave it at that for now. That there are two approaches. That God is everything and everything is God, and we have to understand these a little bit better in the next class. I'm hoping that there will be a class this.